will, take your Bible, turn to Mark chapter 4. And we're beginning in verse 35. And we're going to be studying the next three messages will be on three elements of Jesus demonstrating power over. The very first one is the power over nature. So let's study that one together this morning as we read from Mark chapter 4, verse 35. That day, when the evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side," leaving the crowd behind. They took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care that if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you afraid? Are so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now the teaching about the growth of the church had come to an end. Remember, Jesus had gotten into a boat, pushed just a little offshore, and was teaching a crowd of people. So teaching of that crowd of people had come to an end. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Go to the other side." What were the parables that he taught? He taught them about the sower and the seed and the soils. He taught them about the light of the kingdom, driving out darkness. He talked about the growing of the kingdom, sowing and growing in the midst of the weeds. An immensity of the kingdom, the mustard seed and the mustard tree. And now it's time to leave the crowds behind and go elsewhere. Jesus taught from that boat from morning until night. He is physically tired. His disciples take him in the boat just like he was. He goes to the stern of the boat, the back of the boat, has a cushion, and he's sleeping on the cushion. And wouldn't it be so easy to imagine that Jesus would not get tired because he was God? You'd say, well, you know, it wouldn't be a far stretch of the imagination to believe that he had this superhuman power because he was God. But what we have here is a beautiful picture of the humanity of Jesus. Because he was human. He was fully human and fully God at the same time. God in the flesh. And yet, all the power of God, and he could always tell when the power of God flowed from him. You know, he's walking in the middle of a crowd, and they're walking to Jairus' house, and a woman who had been sick for a number of years reached and just touched his robe, and he knew immediately that power had left him. So Jesus was very powerful, and yet he was also very human. He tired just like we do. Human beings. Don't you understand yet that that's what God gave us night for? There needs to be a downtime every day. We need to rest. Jesus needed rest. We need to rest to be our best. He also gives us downtime each week. Every Sunday is downtime. It's worship time. It's rest time. It's time to recuperate, and it's time to worship the Lord in spirit and truth and be energized for what we will face in the next 6 days. It's a restful time. So Jesus tired just like we tired today. So after a long day of teaching, You can imagine teaching for 12 hours. That's a long time. He was tired, so he went to sleep. The one thing I did notice in this passage that I've never seen before is that there were other boats with him. You see that? The disciples took him in the boat where he was. He takes a cushion, he sleeps in the stern, and the disciples are, rowing the boat out to in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake Galilee. And there were other boats with him. Everywhere the Word of God is taught, it's preached, or it's lived, there are observers. There are followers. There are people who are needing to see and to hear about the Lord. There are people who need to be taught how to live in the right way. That is what I see when I see these other boats coming. Wherever He is, wherever the Savior is, wherever He's taught, where the truth is preached, where the truth is taught, where the truth is lived, there will be those there to observe it. And until He returns, that's going to be the way things are. Even today, where the truth is preached, the way is taught, and the life is given, there will be people who follow. There's a serious need for every Christian to portray Jesus. We need to show those around us what a difference God makes when He lives in our lives. We should be different, not the same as the world. We should be different. We should be more powerful than the world could ever expect, because we have the Lord. People need to see the Lord Jesus Christ in our lives.
That's my milk.
And now we come to power over the storm. This would be nature. Now, while the disciples are following, while the apostles are actually rowing Christ out into the lake, and they're going to the other side, a furious storm arises. Now, the Sea of Galilee sits in kind of a bowl, all right? As I understand it, there are mountains on one side and there are mountains on the other side. And that funnel that is created there gives way to some of the most tenacious storms that you could ever imagine. If you've ever been out on the sea, when it gets rough, you know what these disciples were up against. In fact, it says their boat, or their craft, was beginning to sink. It was beginning to fill up with water. The water outside was getting inside, and it was destroying the buoyancy of the boat, and the boat was sinking. And the disciples look, and there's Jesus in the stern of this boat, and He's asleep. And their cry was, Lord, don't you care that we're about to die? Don't you care that we're perishing? Master, don't you care? Now, we should not vilify those apostles. These were seasoned fishermen. Most of them were fishermen, if you recall. Came from fisher families. They'd faced storms. They'd faced, they'd been out fishing when it was not calm seas. But even for these seasoned fishermen, this storm was terrible. It was awe-inspiring, and they were afraid. But we should not take heart in what they were going through, because every one of us at some time in our life have probably cried out to God with, Lord, why have you forsaken me? I pray, but you don't answer. I read the Word and I can't get anything from it. It seems like all of life is crashing around me and I'm just being isolated from everything else. And I think it is those times when Jesus would look at us as He looked at those apostles in that boat with Him and say, do you still have no faith? Do you still have no faith? See, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. If it is seen, it's not faith. If you have it and you hold it, it's not faith. Faith is trusting God in the worst of times because we know we have a relationship with Him. And no matter what the outcome is, it's going to bring glory and praise and honor to God. This is what Jesus was trying to get across to the disciples. How often have we been alarmed by some storm of life brewing around us and felt alone with no sense of God's presence? How have we not wondered in perilous times whether God and our Father may have left us or is not hearing our prayers for deliverance? We certainly can identify with these disciples. We are in need to trust God. And every person has those weak moments. Every person. It doesn't matter who you are or how strong you think your faith is. You'll have those moments when you need to look to Jesus and say, I trust you. I trust you. In some of the darkest times is when Jesus is so active on our part. He is blessing us beyond belief, even though we can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't hear it, we can't smell it, and we can't touch it. It's just know He's there. Rest assured that Jesus knows what your plight is and my plight. And He has not abandoned us, nor has He failed to hear our cries of fear and doubt. It may just be a test. It doesn't make it any less terrifying, but it may be a test to draw us closer and to make us stronger than we were before. His answer for them and His answer for you and me is peace. Be still. They woke Him up. And He didn't look at them and say, don't you have any faith? In the middle of the storm, He didn't do that. He woke up, saw the storm, said, peace. And the waves calmed. And the wind died down. And the boat stopped filling with water. And then in that teachable moment, He looks to His disciples and says, don't you have faith? Do you still have no faith? You see, it wasn't a question of their lack of faith. It was Jesus wanting to teach them to rely completely on Him in every situation. Okay? So this was nature at its worst. It's in the middle of, you're in the middle of a lake. The storm is brewing. It continues to broil. Your boat's filling up and it's sinking, and you cry out to the Lord, Lord, do you care that I'm dying? And God says, peace, be still. And He said the peace, I believe, to the storm. And He said, be still, to the disciples. He was saying to them, be still and know that I am God. It's not your storm. It's not your nature to be afraid. Don't be afraid. Be still. You know that God is. And that He is still on His throne. And He is still in charge. Peace and the fear was dispelled. Shalom and the calmness came. Be quiet and the storm stops raging. God hasn't lost any of His power. And He hasn't abandoned any of us. Understand this, that with the 12 in that boat, Jesus was there. He was subject to the same storm that His disciples were subject to. You ever thought about that? When you're facing your worst fear, that Jesus is there. He's facing it with you. And all we need to do is find Him. What we need to do is trust Him. He's there. He wasn't on the outside of the boat like He was another time when He was walking across the water in the storm. And Peter saw Him and said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you. And he jumps out of the boat and he starts walking on the water. This wasn't that time. The disciples were there and they were in a storm, but Jesus was in the storm with them. Our lesson for today: in the storms of life, no matter how hard they blow, Christ is right there with you. You believe Him as Lord of your life. You trust Him to save you. He is always there. He said to His disciples when they questioned Him about, He told them He wasn't going to be there with them all the time. He said, Lord, what do we do? What do we do? He said, I'm not leaving you comfortless. The Holy Spirit will come. He will make His home in your life. You will never be alone. Christ Himself, the person of the Holy Spirit, in us, in the midst of the storms. Take heart. Rejoice. You're there for a purpose. You're there to preach the message of faith. You're there to portray how Christ delivers and delivers wholly, fully, and perfectly. That is our reason. When Jesus looks at us and says, "Have you still no faith?" Let's look at Him and say, "Forgive me, Lord. I trust you because you never left me. You always been. Peace be still. Peace within, peace without. No matter what the storms of life bring, no matter what the storms inside do, Christ is there. He overcomes in every situation. I pray that you will study that passage over and over and understand that God still has power over the nature that He created. God still has power over the human nature that He gave you. God is more powerful than anything nature can do. I laugh every time I hear somebody say, Mother Nature's doing this. There's no Mother Nature. This is God's creation. He's still in charge. One more thing. We're God's creation. He's still in charge. No matter what the storms bring, He's still